Thank you all for joining us at our Neapolitan session. My name is Kathleen McAvoy. I am the Senior Policy Fellow at the EveryLibrary Institute, and I'm also a board member of EveryLibrary, and I'll be helping you to understand how many of you have heard of EveryLibrary, how many of you know EveryLibrary. So EveryLibrary is a library super PAC. We work on behalf of libraries, and the EveryLibrary Institute is the research side. And as we've been working with libraries and what's been happening with public and school libraries, we've started to see what's happening on the university side. So if you have any questions afterwards, I'll be here, and our executive director, John Troska, is also here, as well as a few board members. So maybe we'll be available. But so today I wanted to start off, just kick off this conversation, and then let our academic experts take it away. But especially now in this time, it is definitely a time of a fraught time, right? A time of a lot of unknowns. And so we may not end up giving you any answers and anything to walk away with, but except food for thought. And that's what we're hoping to give you. And so I hope that we can talk about on-campus allies, which we have in Carissa Vogel and Lucy Santos-Green, and then also in terms of what you're doing at your universities. And here we have Nancy Kirkpatrick as well. So I think I want to start off with this question. We talked about being really pragmatic. Like, what is knowing where we are now and thinking about what is the best way to move forward, to communicate with and to fill the needs of our stakeholders, especially in a time that might rankle our own political beliefs or might, where we're operating in a place that may be from fear. How do we start to make that transition? And what have you done that's been successful? And I think I'll start with Lucy. And we can also introduce ourselves.
Yeah, hi everybody. So I'm Lucy Santos-Green. I'm the director of the School of Library and Information Science at the University of Iowa. And I want to start by sharing the lens that I wear over everything. I started out my career as a music teacher. So my first degree was in music education. And one thing you will find that music educators know deep in their hearts is that existing is going to be something you're going to have to argue for the rest of your career. And I find this to be the case in most fine arts. It seems like we're always having to argue with people like, yes, we are good for you. Yes, we will make your community a better place. Yes, we will make the student learning experience an improved factor. Music education is worthwhile. And so we say this a lot in music ed. We say we are born out of advocacy. So the lens that I wear in my current position is that I have never expected to be in higher ed for more than 2 seconds where I am celebrated for existing. I don't find that to be the case. I find that overall, what we consider to be a tax on higher education or a tax on, librarianship services, I find that to be a common thing that has pretty much happened for the entirety of my career. And so the lens I wear is that I accept that a big part of my job is translating what I do into things that other people crave. And so that's what I have started to do at the University of Iowa. I spend a large amount of time explaining how the school meets the needs of those in the state, whether they would personally enjoy spending time with me or not, because that part is irrelevant. And I think that's where we're coming to it from the pragmatic standpoint. What is it that the school can do to make the lives of Iowans better? And I pull from my music ed background in that. I translate the language outside of what I like to call librarianese into words that are acceptable, welcoming, and appreciated by the people that I'm talking to, whoever they may be. One of my alumni is a state rep from a party that has been pushing for cuts across the state to library funding. So often I am able to practice talking with this person and again explaining how we meet needs and desires that they have in language that they enjoy. And so it sounds sticky, but again, I feel like it's been part of my career since the very beginning. And I invite people sometimes to accept that as a fact of our career, that our careers, what we do, the work that we do, is one that we're probably always going to have to justify, no matter who is in power, no matter who is signing off on the budget. And so what are ways that I can use language to the advantage of my program and tie what we're doing, again, with what is wanted, what is needed, what is appreciated? How can I make it attractive, accessible? How can I describe in detail ways that my program meets the mission and the need and the wants that you may have, person with the purse strings? So that's my little background and introduction on that one.
And I think one of the things that I'm really grateful for Carissa being here is that you started, and we started talking about what your on-campus allies. So why don't, Carissa, you introduce yourself and let us know how you and Lucy started to work together.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Carissa Vogel. I'm the director of the University of Iowa Law Library, and I'm a faculty member in the College of Law. So Lucy and I started talking because, of course, I have a master's degree in library science, so buddies, right, from that standpoint, but also thinking about as the flagship university of the state, how can we work together to support our community and to engage with community when we had very clear messaging from our administration that part of our mission is figuring out how do we support and tell good stories about what we can do for the people of Iowa and how we can work together on some of those projects. So of course, you find your natural allies, right? And so that's how Lucy and I came to talk. And then we realized that we were thinking a lot about the same things in kind of our support for different communities in the state, though in different ways. But how could we be working together and supporting each other? We also thought about, here's the shared place. I have a public law library. We don't have county law libraries in the state of Iowa. So our public libraries are the place that everyone comes to for their first contact if they have a legal issue, right? Many people don't know about legal aid, and legal aid can't serve everybody if people exceed the income threshold, right? So we thought about, how do we reach out to public libraries to give them the information, the support that they need? What is Lucy hearing from her alums that often go back and support their communities in the state so that we can fulfill some of those needs? And then I started talking to her about a grant-funded initiative that came to me from the state library. So we created an easy-to-understand legal information website for the state library and did trainings for librarians around the state and continue to do those trainings to serve people. So I think back to the pragmatic thing, it does not matter who is in power or who is privileged in a particular way at a particular time. There are people who need help and service, and there are helpers that need to give help and service to people. How do we meet those particular needs, and how do we align with those kinds of interests to do what we do best, which is help people to information?
And I think introducing and having Nancy speak, now Nancy's moved to Florida, and obviously, taking over a program there and starting, maybe you started a few years ago, what some people will be dealing with.
Well, I'm Nancy Kirkpatrick. I'm the Dean of University Libraries at Florida International University in Miami. I'm also a recovering attorney, which means I'm just retired from that field. So that's what I did before librarianship. And then I like to joke that nothing I say here should ever be construed as legal advice because I'm retired in good standing and I would like to keep it that way. So how do we deal with this? So my first thought was that I've been at FIU for a year now, just over a year. And when I'm working with our various communities and stakeholders, my first thought is that I assume intent. And I know a lot of people want you to assume positive intent, but I live in Florida. And so I can't assume positive intent when I read legislation that is contrary to the higher educational goals of our institution. So I assume intent, and then I try to be intentional in my response to that. So for me, that requires a lot of deep breathing exercises and not reacting to the news when I am foolish enough to watch it or pay attention. But it also means thinking about who is intentional about supporting the library and how do I make sure that they know the reality of the situations that we're in and how can we be proactive about how we respond. And frankly, sometimes that means we can't do anything, but if there's something we can do, what is the thing that we can do and how do we potentially do that without drawing any attention to ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that we also wanted to get across, and I think everyone here has a great way to illustrate it, is how do you speak to your stakeholders in a way they need to be spoken to? There's a great book called The Platinum Rule. It plays on the golden rule. It doesn't say treat people how they need to be, treat people how you would want to be treated. It's treat people the way they need to be treated. So really understanding who they are. And maybe Lucy will tell us about persistence, her model. But one of the things that I think each one can share is how do you make it make sense to them? How do you increase your funding, not by, in a way, and the way you're doing it is because you're making the case to a person who can, in a way that person can understand. So I think, Lucy, could you start with how you doubled your budget?
Yeah, 1.5.
1.5.
Yeah, so when I was hired, I knew that our budget needed to be vastly increased. It really was at a good 30% of what it needed to be. We're still not quite there, but we're getting there. And the first thing that I did was take on the work that I learned from a mentor of mine in Georgia who was a fundraising person with the Knox Foundation. And she used to do this really deep dive into her targets. She would know where they like to go eat, what they like to do for fun, what they prioritized, what they enjoyed, who their friendship circles were. And I thought at first it was a little invasive, but then I really began to understand that what she was doing was figuring out what their language was. What was prioritized to them, what were their foundational values, and how would they understand most easily what analogies would work the best. And so I did a deep dive on our associate graduate provost, who also happens to be the dean of the college that houses my school. And I found out that she had been a former high school English teacher and that she had come out of the College of Education. And so I also found out that she really is someone who appreciates a logical tree. She likes to see the journey of your argument from the beginning to the conclusion. So knowing those things, I put together a budget request presentation that moved away from budget sheets to visualizations, and I used a per student number. I broke down what the college was investing per student, and then I compared it across the other 4 programs in our system that graduated more students than we did, and then I compared it across the Big Ten. After that, I also presented my logic, a pathway very quickly on again, following her pattern from her emails that she sends to us, how I got from here to this request. And in creating this presentation in a way that I knew would touch upon what she prioritized, what the mission was for the grad college that she had in mind, I was able to make a much stronger case. And so that year, my budget was increased. It was doubled, and then another 50% after that, added that. And it was a drastic, drastic shift. But it's, again, because that argument you make. And I think from that, what I want to reiterate is when you talk to people, know what your purpose is for that particular exchange. And you really do need to keep that in mind all of the time. Whoever you're coming to, it's so hard not to want to argue and bring someone over to your side. You know, if they say something and you're like, that's the dumbest crap I've ever heard, I need to help you. And you want to correct, you want to bring someone over, you want to enlighten them, you want them to agree with you. But that's not the point of a lot of our interactions. The point of a lot of interactions that we have in our positions now is to earn a seat at their table, to get to a point where you are developing a trusting exchange. And so to do that, you need to take time to listen, and you need to identify what your intention is for that particular interaction, and then you need to stick to that intention. And I'm from Brazil, and we have a saying that is swallow the frog. So a lot of times somebody will say something and you want to correct them on the spot, or you want to push back on the spot, or you want to win that battle on the spot. And what you have to do is swallow the frog and use that interaction to earn a seat at the table. And then we'll talk a little bit more about what you do once you're at the table, but that's what I wanted to be able to do in the setting that I'm in now, is how do I earn a seat at the table? How do I have that conversation to get more funding? The very first interaction I had with my dean was not one where I was coming to her and saying, hey, I need blah, 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 blah. No, it's, and she had said some things in that meeting that I did not think were accurate, but you swallow the frog, you earn that place at the table, you take your time to learn about your stakeholder and what they're going to receive from you, how they're going to receive it, how they're best going to receive it, and then you use that information to present. And that's then a second purpose at that time, that you have that second interaction when you're at the table. But that was a lesson that I learned, and thankfully it was a positive one at that time.
I think the way Carissa described it, which I love, was, do you want to be right or do you want to be funded? And Carissa also brought up something I think that we can also remember when we were discussing this presentation, and it was her philosophy of using arachnids to explain.
So I have used all kinds of different ways to think about what an institution needed of me and what the department within needed from me as a leader. So at my previous institution, we were facing significant budget cuts, and I already had a department that had budget cuts and positions cut for a really long time. So we didn't have any fat to cut. You've all heard that, right? Like, oh, we just have to trim the fat. And I said, well, you've trimmed the fat, you've trimmed the sinew, you're now getting into bone marrow. So that's kind of how I thought about it. And I said, okay, what is the strengths that we have as a library? We're information professionals, we have relationships, people generally feel positively about the library. So I told my staff, we are spiders. We are building webs, and we are going to have connections and see connections within this institution that strengthens it and supports it, even as these other groups are cut, right? So the fundraising group is getting this kind of cut. Can we help? We already do some of this supporting thing with alumni affairs. We will remind them that we do that, right? and we will be more intentional about putting the law library underneath the memo that we send back to them with the research that they requested. Because I don't want to be the one that is constantly saying, don't cut the library budget or the staff. I want everybody else to be saying, how can we cut this part of the library? I now rely on it for X, Y, and Z. You can't cut that. They do all of this support with orientation and graduation and student service support, right? How can we find that kind of expression, right? That's not the answer for everybody, but that was the answer that I had there. What are the other ways in the problems that we're finding that we can bring people on board to help kind of be the answer that is needed in our particular context for a particular institution?
And I think, Nancy, you had maybe a moment where you realized, how do I bring more money into my library? There are mechanisms to do so in terms of research dollars.
Right, and we'll see if I pull that off.
We're fingers crossed.
Yeah,
No
toes,
pressure.
yeah. So what's interesting to me is that the library is clearly, I think this is unarguably one of the most valuable resources on any university campus, but it's also sometimes one of the most undervalued resources on a university campus. And so my question is, how do we change that? And it's, for me, it's what you're doing already, of course, and it is relationships. So for me, that means I have to leave the library building and go talk to our stakeholders across campus. So it's not just showing up at the DAC, the Dean's Advisory Council, and making friends. It's going to the tech fee committee meeting. It's going to the Board of Trustees meetings and learning what's happening. It's going to the Faculty Senate meeting and presenting about the budget. It's going to the Miami Book Fair Gala when I'm invited, because I never know who could be a potential donor. So I say yes to almost every invitation. If my calendar allows, I say yes to every invitation. And football games, I will go to a football game and stand in the president's box and talk to alumni and ask them what their favorite memory of the library is, because you don't know. Again, in those settings, everybody loves the library, and I'm like, great, show me how much you love the library with your planned giving, please. But the other thing that is interesting to me is that I would defy our Office of Research and Development to find any grant application that has left our university that did not use a library resource, if not many, to create the proposal that was then funded. So they're using our resources, as they should appropriately, to write grants and be funded. And when that funding comes back, right now the library sees none of that money. And I'm proposing that if we're taking whatever percent off the top to run operations, that literally a 0.5% would be a game changer for the library budget. I actually want a full percent or more, but I will start small and try to work my way up. So that means that I'm having conversations with the Office of Research and Economic Development. So I'm not, I would like to sit in my office and say, woe is me, and be in the fetal position, but no, I really wouldn't. I would like to see the library succeed more than it ever has, and doing that means I have to get out of the office and meet people.
Yeah, I would say that's where you definitely want to partner with the iSchool, or if you have the School of Library and Information Science, because that's one of the things that I'm working with our academic librarian liaison on. We've actually created a standard paragraph that we are now asking all faculty to add to their grant applications that states this amount is going to be dedicated to the university library or to this particular librarian. We are pulling for as much funding from it. And we even say, when we put in the grant, we say it can either come out of the grant fund that we're putting through, or if the university wants to up the odds of being funded, perhaps we can redirect some of the indirect funds to come back. So we have a standard paragraph now that we've put out that we're adding there to make that implicit support explicit, because you just assume that people know, but they don't.
Yes, and Carissa's had some success with this. Yeah.
Yes, so I, as a faculty member in the College of Law, right, I have a different relationship because we're embedded into that college, and these are my colleagues. So I started out new, so I got to ask a whole bunch of questions, right? That's a great reason to have to meet with everybody. And I would just ask them kind of, what's the research that you're undertaking now? I went into every single meeting knowing exactly what research they were undertaking right now. But I wanted to be in that space of listening because people love talking about their research interests. And then I would talk about, oh, what are the ways that the library is helping you with that, knowing exactly the ways that the library was helping them with that. And then for those, because the College of Law usually isn't a place where there's a lot of grant funding, but we did have some of those in the College of Law. So specifically, I knew which one of the faculty were looking at or doing grant-funded research. And I said, oh, so you're doing this. I understand that this person is helping you with this. It sounds like in the next time that we're writing a grant application, we should be adding that person into the grants. And then I talk to them, and then they also talk to each other. So now it's a pretty regular part of a process as I'm hearing that people are getting grants, that then I'm going and talking to them, but they're even coming to me and saying, does this person have this much time to be able to help me? And I will absolutely find a way to make sure that that person has particular time to help them, even if I have to shift kind of other duties and things around. But we are now named, right? We now literally have stakes in the game, right? When we write our annual reports, we can talk about the fact that we received this kind of funding and helped supported the library, the law school directly, or these particular articles or white papers or research in these particular ways. And that is the language that our provost office and our presidents really understand. And then when they're paying attention to that, then I talk about some of the grants that the library has directly that's never happened before, and how that's actually benefiting the institution. So using those different kind of pathways in with those relationships, with coming from a place of curiosity, having done your research, so you know the questions to ask, and then having, as Lucy talks about, your agenda, you know what you want to get out of that interaction.
When if we then apply sort of the political landscape, this overview on top of all of these things that have been successful and all of these things that we're preparing to do, one of the things that I've experienced with advocating or lobbying against or for a bill is not to take a for or against approach, but to take an awareness-based approach. And sometimes it is pointing out the poison pills. It is pointing out why something will be untenable. It's pointing out the unintended consequences. And I think Lucy had a great way of thinking about this in terms of, what do librarians do well? They follow rules.
That's right.
They create rules. They create policies.
Yes.
And so how do you apply that to a situation where you don't want to take a side, but you might be in a situation that you need to protect your institution, your library, your staff, and your students and faculty as well.
Yeah. So whether I have a side or not is irrelevant. That's ultimately the case. Again, learned from a lifetime of being an opinionated person, it does not help me to come into a room with a side pre-taken, because I then become immediately something to push back against or to argue with. So what I'm trying to do now, again, is come in and say, I see that you're considering this. I see that you're thinking about cutting this or that, or you're thinking about shifting efforts away from here, or you're thinking about underfunding this particular blah, blah, blah. I don't use the word underfunding. I see you're thinking about doing this, and would love to talk to you about ways to address these concerns that you have. It looks like if we, and then this is where I present the ways that it's currently being taken care of by what I have. to provide. All right, so here we go. It's funded at this right now, and it's doing these things for you. It's meeting these needs for you at this rate. This is what it's costing you right now. If you were to improve the funding by this much, usually not as much as they think, then you're going to get this much more out of it. Or maybe you want to start over. Sounds like maybe that's an option that you're considering. So here's what starting over might cost you. And this is what it might get you. Here's a third option. Maybe you might want to do what these other peer institutions that you super love, because I see you trolling their social media accounts, are doing. And look what they're funding, and look what it's costing them. In comparison, always in comparison to what it costs them per student and what it would cost us per student. And in doing this, I'm not saying I'm the best thing ever. I'm not coming in saying I'm the best thing ever. I'm just showing you that I'm the best thing ever. I'm showing you that I'm the best bang for your buck, that improving your funding for me is your best, cheapest choice to get what you already want. That's what I'm bringing to the table in my argument, because I want to posit that I'm not coming here to push for something that I believe is the best. I am going to demonstrate to you how I am one of several options to address a concern that you have, and how ultimately I may look like on paper the best option, and then I have to actually be the best option. But that's what I've had to work towards doing. Again, identifying what the people in the room want, what they're concerned about, what they're craving, and then being very explicit, and I come to this all the time, shifting what's implicit to explicit to demonstrate the ways that I'm meeting that need, because there is no other group of people in the world other than academics who love to sit in a room for hours and hours pretending they know about something because they don't want to admit that they don't. So be the person who defines the simple things. Be the person who is explicit and clarifies those things. You will be so much more appreciated. It's very, very hard to, it is. As a faculty member, I know this. It's difficult to come into a meeting, to have someone go on and on and on about something, and I'm dying to ask them, what are you talking about? But I am not going to ask them that. I'm not going to be the person in the room that exposes my ignorance. So I would be so grateful if that person were to say, I'm explaining this, but here, let me just tell y'all what it means. It looks like this, or it's this. We can do that when we come to the table. We can be very explicit about the ways the library will, for example, Nancy and I were talking earlier about data, about how many grant applications, especially at the federal level, will require faculty to house the data permanently afterwards. And faculty will make all kinds of promises on those grant applications, and then they go to meet with the academic library, and the academic librarian's like, oh, honey, all of your dreams, I have now stabbed them to death. And so having that conversation where you're clarifying, where you're being very explicit with faculty, here are things we can do for you, here are how we're going to help you, this is what it typically costs to do this, which is why that indirect rate should be coming to fund this, and look, if it does, it funds this amazing thing that then we can say we have, and it funds it at such a lower rate than if you were to do it this other way. Be explicit and use language to define and explain and introduce without being invited to do so, because boy, the imposter syndrome is so strong in our profession.
And before we ask if anyone has questions, I want to just give Nancy a chance to respond as the Dean of the University Libraries.
Oh, Lord. Can I just co-sign everything that you just said? That's it. No, that really is it. It make the explicit, or the implied explicit, but also I'm actually the person that's not afraid to say, hi, I don't know what you're talking about. And because I'm new at FIU, it's a really, like I've been using my first year as, hi, I'm new and I plan to use that for as long as I can get away with it. But also, we as librarians, I think the royal we as a profession, like not necessarily me individually, are in this profession because we want to help people, and sometimes we're people pleasers. So then when things go wrong, we don't tell them. So like the budget issue at FIU was not really a secret because we had a flat budget for 10 years because that's just the way, but like people outside the library didn't seem to know that until I went to the faculty senate meeting. Well, they knew it when they tried to order books this year, and I said, "Hi, I'm sorry, I can't order the book for you, and here's why." And they were like, "What?" Hands going. So I think we need to stop trying to be all things to all people at the cost of, failure, which is sometimes what we end up doing, and instead just say, be transparent and say, listen, this is how it is this year, hopefully this year, and here's how you can still help me. Send me all your requests for books, because I need to be able to go to the provost and say, our budget was short this year. This is how much money I need this year. I need a 5% inflation increase every year after that. I also need this if we want to invest in this area of research that, this project seems to be super interested in. But you have to have the conversations, and you have to be willing to say, things are not ideal, and here's our plan to improve them. But you can't just pretend the problems aren't happening. I mean, you can, but at your own peril, so.
And we have about 10 minutes if anyone has questions, because obviously we could just keep talking. We've been talking about this for 2 days. So is there anybody who has any questions or any concerns? Are you transitioning into a new role, into a state where you're expecting there could be legislation, or there is legislation? I know a lot of people can feel unsafe in speaking about themselves, or feel like they have to shield. But I think if you're going in with those kinds of mindsets, one of the things that I heard somebody say was, don't hand out remote controls, hand out manuals, right? Don't let somebody push a button and get you to react in a certain way. Tell people how you expect to be treated. And if you left with anything from me, that would be it, because I do think this is an incredible profession, and I feel a kinship, having worked in it for almost 20 years, and to be feeling, and on the EveryLibrary side, like a defender of the profession and of higher ed. And I do think there's a lot coming down the pike that we may not understand. That will impact a lot of areas that we may not be able to picture yet. But I do think there's community and there are resources